Hi, I'm Jenny. For my ETEC 565 practicum, I worked with the Canadian Digital Learning Research Association, CDLRA, to explore perceptions around the quality of online learning. This research was inspired by my questions and concerns around online learning back in 2020, when my program at the time got moved online. To give some context to my project, I'm going to present a timeline of events first. I started the project mid-September and submitted my midterm project in annotated bibliography mid-October. From then till early November, I analyzed CDLRA data. I finished my draft paper at the end of November and submitted a good copy about a week later in early December. During the 13 weeks, I was taking 2 other courses and working 1.5 jobs. So, I definitely got to polish my time management skills over the weeks. I had a bit of a breakthrough with that actually. I realized through this project that the key to being efficient was to have a solid plan and to work on one task continuously before switching to another. This was difficult for me as an avid multitasker. I used to overlook the planning stage because I wanted to get started straight away with my projects. But now, I know how crucial blueprints are. I also found that I was more efficient working for longer stretches of time rather than breaking up my tasks into smaller chunks, especially with writing the paper. Once I got going, it was hard to stop. Now I'm going to talk about the midterm project. This was my first formal annotated bibliography. It was straightforward, but ended up being much more helpful than I imagined. Finding suitable papers was the most time-consuming part. I used the UBC library and learned to be strategic with keywords and search conditions. I finally made use of UBC Ask Away, an online chat with librarians for citation and research help. Learning online has definitely made me more resourceful. For the 5 years I was at UBC physically, I never considered going to the library for help. The writing of the bibliography was fairly straightforward because the papers were easy to understand and I followed a similar format for each entry. It was helpful to take into account the context of the studies, the methods, the results, and limitations for future reference. If I were to write a paper in the future, I'm definitely starting with an annotated bibliography. Moving on, I'll be detailing my writing process. This paper was the first one I've written in education and independently. It wasn't a small task by any means. I started with brainstorming questions, and it took me a while to refine them, which I was slightly worried about at first. I've been used to writing scientific papers, so I had to acclimate myself to the mixed methods approach, which was much less restrictive. It definitely felt strange at first not having a hypothesis or collecting my own data, so I had to set aside my former ways of doing things. I did quite a bit of reading on qualitative and mixed methods research. I learned about how the constant comparative method and thematic analysis were used in education. Again, my science mind would have been much more comfortable following a straightforward research protocol. But here, things had more flexibility, and it took me a while to wrap my mind around how to even begin analyzing data, because the process was so open-ended. The lengthiest part was definitely the qualitative data analysis. I ended up using Excel for this. I created a color-coded system to organize comments and keep track of codes. I went through the whole dataset twice and then combed through my selected data 4 times, for coding of open-ended comments. The first few days going through the data, no patterns seemed to emerge, but I understood this as being a part of research. It took about a week for a total of 22 codes to emerge, and the categories in which they were grouped gave rise to 4 themes. This being my first time trying this research method, there was definitely a lot of uncertainty. I tried my best to let the data speak for itself, and it was indeed satisfying when I finished the analysis. Writing the paper was the next task. I started with the methods section after having done the data analysis, and then the results. The most difficult parts were presenting findings in an organized fashion and finding a way to combine quantitative and qualitative data. I ended up splitting the results section into multiple parts corresponding to the survey questions and themes. Afterwards, I wrote the introduction, referring often to my annotated bibliography. The last items were the discussion, limitations, conclusion, and abstract. For the discussion, I again used my references, but this time around, I was surprised at how familiar I'd become with the papers. I was familiar enough with them that I could easily locate the information I wanted in a given paper. I also did some extra research to compare my findings. In retrospect, everything I did makes sense now, but at the time, every step took a lot of planning and revising. Through the process of writing the paper, I also learned about online learning myself. It was a unique experience to play with data firsthand. Having said that, there are still many things I can work on. Given the time frame of the project, I did my best to put together a presentable paper, but admittedly, I could have done more revising and editing. I spent a solid amount of effort trying to get NVivo to work on my laptop to no avail. I feel that would have been beneficial in reducing some human error. Collaboration with peers would also have been helpful in terms of reviewing the data analysis or editing the draft. Finally, I'm working on my academic voice, figuring out the right vocabulary, citations, and level of formality.
This was a challenging but worthwhile and useful experience to have in the MET program. I walked away with so much about online learning and educational research, and would definitely recommend this practicum to anyone interested in trying out research.